I know.
So my name is Yuri Doolan. I'm currently an assistant professor of history and women's gender and sexuality studies at Brandeis University, where I'm also inaugural chair of Asian American and Pacific Islander Studies. And for this academic school year, I'm currently on a Fulbright research fellowship to be here in Seoul. So my mom and dad met in the 1980s during my father's military tour of South Korea. Shortly after my birth, my parents decided it was time to move back to Korea because my mom was having a lot of difficulty with adjustment in the States. And I think my father thought this would be a good way to maybe kind of like save the marriage. And so we went to Songtan, it's right outside Osan Air Base. They're really just kind of my first memories of life. It abruptly ended because my parents decided they were going to get divorced, and so we moved back to the States really abruptly. Actually, we didn't move to the States. My dad just kind of he just kind of took us one night because he wanted to make sure that kind of like the divorce would happen in the US and not Korea. And he was scared that my mom might like run away with us somewhere in Korea where he couldn't find us. And actually something I learned in my research was like approximately 2/3 of the marriages between US soldiers and Korean women often do end in divorce. So that isn't very uncommon. This is all according to his side of the story though. He said like he swooped in basically and rescued us and took us back to the States. And I remember that night, he just like snuck in and woke us up, and I don't know where my mom was, why she wasn't home. He just took us to the airport and we flew to the States that day. She describes that time as like really, really traumatic for her because she just, kind of came home and we were gone. But, after that, she had to come to the States. The one thing that did force was she had to come to the States where the divorce could kind of, be finalized and settled. Obviously my mom found us, but she had to establish herself. When they got divorced, the courts did grant her custody.
Okay.
But they also took away our passports.
I was gonna ask.
Yeah.
I wouldn't necessarily say it was a willing decision to become an immigrant in the US then.
She was kind of forced to make a life here and build a life for herself. And she didn't make a life for herself, and she made it all her own, I think. And I think that is really meaningful to her to this day.
나는 엄마한테 물어볼 게 참 많아요. 평생을 곱씹어온 질문들이에요. 그리고 내가 과거를 이해하려고 그토록 노력하는 이유를 알 수도 모를 수도 있겠지만 엄마를 더 알고 싶다는 내 욕심에서 비롯했답니다.
It's kind of weird for me to think about, but I think she has a really strong sense of American identity.
Really? Okay.
Yeah. And it's ironic because, obviously I see the way that other Americans look at her, and I understand that her kind of social belonging in the US is very conditional. But for her, she really kind of, I think, feels like she found herself after the divorce. She didn't have a husband that she was catering towards. She did it her way. So I think that was a really empowering experience for her, as difficult as it probably also was.
So you grew up in a single mother household then in the US, an immigrant mother nonetheless.
So we grew up pretty poor, quite poor. I mean, I would say we did grow up poor. I even remember like when child support checks would call late, being asked to like call my dad to like ask him when they were coming. It was kind of a difficult childhood in that way. But my mom kept the household very Korean, kind of just like a little piece of Korea that she built for herself.
When people think about Korean immigrants, most people don't think about Cleveland, Ohio.
I know, right? Believe it or not, there are actually quite a few Korean churches in Cleveland, Ohio. I don't know. I mean, Koreans, they're always
Korean churches are everywhere, right?
And Koreans are always like, they're always like kind of some drama in the church, and then you switch churches.
Yes.
So
always.
We did that a lot.
Yeah. So were you aware then of who your father was? Were you aware of being white American, or was your sense of identity just, my mom's Korean, therefore I'm Korean?
Honestly, I didn't know that I was mixed race or what that meant, really, because my mom did keep the household so Korean. So I definitely didn't feel like I was mixed race or had any understanding of that, but I knew I was racially different than other people, and I knew I was Asian. In terms of how we were viewed by the broader Korean American community though, I think the relationship with Koreans has always been a little bit difficult. Right after the divorce, where I remember my Korean family being around a lot, and it's my imo and her kids.
So they were already in the States,
They were
right?
in Michigan, yeah. They would take us on trips to amusement parks, and we would go to their houses for holidays, and it was some of my best childhood memories. After a while, my mother continued to ask them for help, financial help. I think actually, I'm not sure if that's just the reason why. I've thought about it so many times. What was the reason why we lost contact with them? Later on, when I learned about Korean military brides and the ways that they're kind of a source of shame and secrecy because of the stigma linking them to the U.S. military and U.S. military, perhaps prostitution in particular, I wondered if that was why we were kept in arms, because it was a military bride family. We were mixed race, and she was a divorcee. There's a scholar, her name is Grace Cho, and she writes about the figure of the yanggongju, which is just a euphemism used to describe
Western princess?
Yeah, the women who fraternize with foreign soldiers. And she says she is both envied and reviled. So envied in the sense that you're talking about, kind of a woman who's in close proximity to the elusive American dream and American wealth, but then reviled for this uncertain, unspoken relationship to the US military, right? The stigma, the stereotype is that, she must have been a former sex worker for the US military. But the lines between that and kind of Chi bride are so blurred.
But it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter whether she was a cocktail waitress or a prostitute or something in between, because those words, when they were first spoken, changed me. Your mother used to be a prostitute. That bit of new information was so huge that it erased my old memories. It made me forget all those years when she was my mama.
Maybe not our generation, but a generation prior, military bride migrations were the primary route to the United States if you were Korean. So if you were related to a military bride, you could get her to sponsor you to also go to the United States as a Korean. In spite of that, right, in spite of being what scholars have called the first link, they're kind of discarded after the entry into the US is facilitated because of the shame and stigma around being associated with a woman who fraternized with US soldiers. That's another kind of tragic irony of it as well. Yuri! I think how I've resolved that in my own life is I became a historian. So I had these questions about my family's history, about my mother, about her past, that she was very secretive about. History became a way for me to fill in the gaps and blank spaces in her narrative. And that also then became a way that I understood my place as a Korean, in understanding my place in Korean history. That was a way that I then became comfortable as a mixed race Korean person, or a person of mixed race Korean identity. They say know your history, know yourself. It was really kind of that situation. There's a very particular historical reason why people like me exist, and we're part of the historical processes of modern South Korea in the post-war era.
So it is fair to say that the thing that sparked your interest in pursuing this as your career, and as far as you've gone with these studies, is directly because of your own relationship with you and your mother. Did you ever talk to your mom about these things? And has she returned to Korea ever?
Oh, wow, yeah, okay. So communication between me and my mom has always been difficult ever since I was a young child. But that being said, she's a single mother. She raised me and my brother single-handedly. We literally saw, the blood, sweat, and tears that went into raising us and trying to provide for us. We didn't have the best relationship growing up. I think, racism played a part in it. We were confused about what we were experiencing, and we looked, and she was Korean and she was our mother, so we could blame her for that. She was also, dealing with her own traumas and disappointments in life. I wrote that memoir piece, Dear Amma, and it even got translated into Korean, but I still haven't
She
even
hasn't
showed
seen
her.
it yet.
Yeah, she hasn't seen it yet, and I don't know.
Do you want her to see it?
I want her to see it, but I'm a little scared / unsure how she'd feel about it. But ultimately, like, I want to be seen. And so that's why I kind of put my work out there in the public, because getting that validation from her might be difficult. I can put it out there in the world and then get that validation elsewhere. I think for her, the piece might be too painful.
That's different when it's about
when
you.
it's so close, right?
Yeah.
Maybe one day. She has returned to Korea, though. As I said, on my Fulbright fellowship, I was able to bring her to Korea for the first time since we lived here. It was like 30 years ago in Songtan. And, that was a really important life moment for me, to be able to bring my mom back to Korea after so many years of struggling in America. I hope her trip back was like worthwhile. I hope it was everything she hoped it would be after waiting for 30 years.
A fellow mixed Korean, Yuri Doolan is a historian who explores the issues of transnational and transracial adoptions, war brides, U.S. military camp towns, and how the impact of ideologies after the Korean War and during the Cold War impacted mixed Koreans then and still today.